Harry Potter and the Forbidden Forest, Chapter 15. Things couldn't have been worse. Filch took them down to Professor McGonagall's study on the first floor, where they sat and waited without saying a word to each other. Hermione was trembling. Excuses, alibis, and wild cover-up stories chased each other around Harry's brain, each more feeble than the last. He couldn't see how they were going to get out of trouble this time. They were concerned. How could they have been so stupid as to forget the clock? There was no reason on earth that Professor McGonagall would accept for their being out of bed and creeping around in school in the dead of night, let alone being up the tallest astronomy tower, which was out of bounds except for classes, and Norbert and the invisibility cloak, and they might as well be packing their bags already. Had Harry thought that things couldn't happen worse? He was wrong. When Professor McGonagall appeared, she was leading Neville. "Harry!" Neville burst on, the moment he saw the other two. "I was trying to find you to warn you. I heard Malfoy saying he was going to catch you. He said you had a drug." Harry shook his head violently to shut Neville up, but Professor McGonagall had seen. She looked more likely to breathe fire than Norbert as she towered over the three of them. "I would never believe it of any of you. Mr. Filch says you were up in the astronomy tower at 1 o'clock in the morning. Explain yourselves." It was the first time Hermione had ever failed to answer a teacher's question. She was staring at her slippers, as still as a statue. "I think I've got a good idea of what's been going on," said Professor McGonagall. "I don't take genius to work it out. You fed Draco Malfoy some cock and bull story about a dragon, trying to get him out of bed and into trouble. I've already caught him. I suppose you think it's funny that Longbottom here heard the story and believed it too." Harry caught Neville's eyes and tried to tell him without words that this wasn't true because Neville was looking stunned and hurt. Poor Blondin. Neville. Harry knew what it must have cost him to try to find them in the dark to warn them. "I'm disgusted," said Professor McGonagall. "4 students out of bed in one night. I've never heard of such a thing before. You, Miss Granger, I thought you had more sense. As for you, Mr. Potter, I thought Gryffindor meant more to you than this. All these of you will receive detentions. Yes, you too, Mr. Longbottom. Nothing gives you the right to walk around school at night, especially these days. It's very dangerous, and 50 points will be taken from Gryffindor." 50? Harry gasped. They would lose the lead. The lead he'd won in the last Quidditch match. 50 points each, said Professor McGonagall, breathing heavily through her long pointing nose. "Professor, please, you can't. Don't tell me what I can and can't do, Potter. Now go back to bed, all of you. I've never been more ashamed of Gryffindor students. 150 points lost. They put Gryffindor in last place. In one night they ruined any chance Gryffindor had had for the House Cup. Harry felt as though the bottom had dropped out of his stomach. Now, how could they ever make up for this? Harry didn't sleep all night. He could hear Neville sobbing into his pillows for what seemed like hours. Harry couldn't think of anything to say to comfort him. He knew Neville, like himself, was dreading in the dark. What would happen when the rest of Gryffindor found out what they'd done? At first, Gryffindor passing the giant hourglasses that recorded the house points the next day through there'd been a mistake. How could they suddenly have 150 points fewer than yesterday? And then the story started to spread. Harry Potter, the famous Harry Potter, the hero of 2 Quidditch matches, had lost them all those points. He and a couple of other stupid first years. From being one of the most popular and admired people at the school, Harry was suddenly the most hated. Even Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs turned on him, because everyone had been longing to see Slytherin lost the House Cup. Everywhere Harry went, people pointed and didn't trouble to lower their voices as they insulted him. Slytherins, on the other hand, clapped as he walked past them, whistling and cheering. "Thanks, Potter, we owe you one." Only Ron stood by him. "They'll all forget this in a few weeks. Fred and George have lost lots of points in all the time they've been here, and people still like them." "They've never lost 150 points in one go, though, have they?" said Harry miserably. "Well, no," Ron admitted. "It was a bit late to repair the damage." But Harry swore to himself not to meddle in things that weren't his business from now on. He'd had it with sneaking around and spying. Harry felt so ashamed of himself that he went to Wood and offered to resign from the Quidditch team. "Resign?" Wood thundered. "What good will that you go? How are we going to get any points back if we can't win at Quidditch?" But even Quidditch had lost its fun. The rest of the team wouldn't speak to Harry during practice, and if they had to speak about him, they called him the Seeker. Hermione and Neville were suffering too. They didn't have as bad time as Harry because they weren't as well known, but nobody would speak to them either. Hermione had stopped drawing attention to herself in class, keeping her head down and working in silence. Harry was almost glad that the exams weren't far away. All the studying he had to do kept minds of his misery. Ron and Hermione kept to themselves, working late into the night, trying to remember the ingredients in complicated potions, learn charms, and spells by heart, memorize the way to magical discoveries and goblin revelations. Then, about a week before the exams were due to start, Harry knew solutions not to interference in anything that didn't concern him was put to an unexpected test. Walking back from the library on his own one afternoon, he heard somebody whimpering from a classroom up ahead. As he drew closer, he heard Carol's voice. No, no, not again, please. It sounded as though someone was threatening him. Harry moved closer. All right, he heard Quirrell sob. Next second, Quirrell came out, hurrying out the classroom, straightening his turban. He was pale and looked as though he was about to cry. He strode out of sight. Harry didn't think Quirrell had even noticed him. He waited until Quirrell's footsteps had disappeared, then peered into the classroom. It was empty, but a door stood ajar at the other end. Harry was halfway toward it before he remembered what he'd promised himself about not meddling. All the same, he had gambled 12 Sorcerer's stone. The Snape had just left the room, and from that what Harry had just heard, Snape would be walking into a new spring in his step. Quirrell seemed to have given in at last. Harry went back to the library, where Hermione was testing Ron on astronomy. Harry told that what he'd heard. Snape's done it then, said Ron. If Quirrell told him how to break his anti-dark force spell, they're still fluffy, though, said Hermione. Maybe Snape's found out how to get past him without asking Hagrid, said Ron, looking up at the thousands of books surrounding them. I bet there's a book somewhere in here telling you how to get past a giant three-headed dog. So, what do we do, Harry? The light of adventure was kindling again in Ron's eyes. But Hermione answered before Harry could. Go to Dumbledore. That's what we should have done ages ago. If we tried anything ourselves, we'll be thrown out of here for sure. But we've got no proof, said Harry. Quirrell's too scared to back us up. Snape's only got to say he doesn't know how the show got in Halloween, and that he was nowhere near the third floor. Who do you think they'll believe, him or us? It's not exactly a secret we hated him. Dumbledore will think we made up to get him scuttled. Phil Jordan helped up his life, defended us. If we just do a bit of poking around. No, said Harry flusteringly. We've done enough poking around. He pulled a map of Jupiter toward him and started to learn the names of its moons. The following morning, notes were delivered to Harry, Hermione, and Neville at the breakfast table. They were all the same. Your detention will take place at 11 o'clock tonight. Meet Filch in the entrance hall.